big on vision, it's big on rhetoric, but exactly as you identify, Andrew, huge questions about the how. So you may want to rewire Britain. Will that actually work? And how are you actually going to pay for that? How are you going to implement it? Who's your Chancellor going to be? What's your approach to foreign policy? What's your approach to Donald Trump? There are so many unanswered questions about Andy Burnham's premiership. And that is quite an extraordinary position to be in, Andrew, because look, he is in number 10 in 3 weeks' time. And I can't remember any Prime Minister coming into power at such short notice when we know so little about what they want to do.
To Stephen Swinford, he's the political editor of The Times. He's been watching the speech as well, and he joins me now. Stephen, give me your overall impression of what Mr. Burnham had to say.
I think it's big on vision, it's big on rhetoric, but exactly as you identify, Andrew, huge questions about the how. So you may want to rewire Britain. Will that actually work? And how are you actually going to pay for that? How are you going to implement it? Who's your Chancellor going to be? What's your approach to foreign policy? What's your approach to Donald Trump? There are so many unanswered questions about Andy Burnham's premiership. And that is quite an extraordinary position to be in, Andrew, because look, he is in number 10 in 3 weeks' time. And I can't remember any Prime Minister coming into power at such short notice when we know so little about what they want to do. And I've come out of this speech and I still don't know how he intends to do all these things and whether they will work.
I mean, as I listened to it, it sounded to me the kind of speech, for example, a presidential candidate who's starting out on the primary trail in the United States would give, or the speech of someone who would be prime minister, but there's a long election to go before that could ever happen. It's a bit strange that we get that same kind of speech from somebody who will be in Downing Street in 3 weeks' time.
That's the extraordinary thing. This is a speech that you'd expect at the beginning of a long administration, or as you say, during the campaigning point. There's also a sense of déjà vu listening to it. I could close my eyes and with a different voice at a different time hear Boris Johnson making an almost identical speech about 10 years for power, levelling up the nation, breaking up part of the Treasury, putting that in Darlington. Obviously Andy Burnham's doing. So there are similarities. I have sat through now so many different speeches where successive Prime Ministers have set out 10 years plans for power, and actually the challenges that you get into power and the reality of making that change is incredibly difficult, and actually galvanising the economy and getting moving. And that's the point, that Andy Burnham does not have long. He might talk about 10 years, but the next election is less than 3 years away. So he really needs to get moving. And a lot of these things he's talking about, as you say, Andrew, are relatively untested. One, there's no guarantee that it will work, that devolution will actually improve growth in those areas, that those people that are elected there will do better than those in Westminster. And that just creates a massive challenge going ahead, I think.
Are we getting any briefings to flesh out some of the things he had to say with no details? For example, he promised the biggest council house building programme since the post-war period. I guess that would take us from 1945 up to, say, 1960, the early 60s. And there were hundreds of thousands of council houses built in that time. Do we have any idea, or we been given any idea, how he'll pay for that?
Bluntly, no. We have no idea how he'll pay for that and what he's going to do with it. And you know, as well as that, there's this gaping hole in terms of the personnel. Like, we should probably at this stage have an idea of at least who his Chancellor is and who other key members of his team are, but we don't. And he's saving that to the last, basically. He wants to set out his broad plans. This is the first of several speeches we're going to hear in the next 3 weeks. And then at the end of that process, he's essentially going to retrofit members of his cabinet to those posts and that vision. So that is his kind of plan. I'll set out my vision first, then decide who is best to implement that vision. And that's the kind of challenge we face. We are dancing in the dark to a degree here, Andrew.
Yeah, indeed. He also talked of more public control, maybe even ownership of utilities. He said water, housing, energy, transport, and then he seemed to imply that public control would be held more at a local level rather than a kind of nationalised industry being controlled by a single body over the whole country. Again, I suspect, Stephen, no fleshing out of that idea either?
No, but it's certainly not nationalisation, which he's previously talked about a lot, because obviously there are huge cost implications for that. And if you were to take over, let's say, Thames, so at the moment he's talking about control, and that is the buzzword: greater public control rather than outright all-out nationalisation, sorry. And then on top of that, he's also talking about the German model, which is, he's referring to something called the basic law in Germany, which is that all regions in Germany are treated in an equivalent way and have equivalent infrastructure, opportunities and living standards. And he's saying that is his inspiration. It's not clear if he's going to legislate for that, like they do in Germany, to actually introduce the basic law, but clearly it's underpinning his thinking. So what you've got is an insight into his theory, his thinking and his principles, but you don't have any of the actuality of how he intends to do this, and crucially when he intends to do this, or whether it's going to actually improve people's lives.
There were some things in it which sounded to me, the old cynic, a bit naive, that he called for a more collaborative politics in Westminster and Whitehall, and the end of turf battles between Whitehall departments. He also called for growth not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And he also wanted not to use the whip system to close down debate. Let me suggest something. None of that will have survived by Christmas. Indeed, it might not even make Halloween.
There's going to be loads of infighting because loads of people are vying for positions, and Whitehall turf wars are as old as time. There is actually a counter-argument you can make that I've often thought, that sometimes debate in government's a good thing. If you've got a contentious policy, if it was actually tested, let's take the decision to unilaterally strip millions of people of winter fuel payments. If that had been subject to a full and proper cabinet debate, or a turf war in Whitehall, as he would call it, that policy might not have happened, and therefore, you know, they may not have ended up in the position where they did as a result of that. So he wants a kind of more consensual approach. It's also worth noting that we are in probably one of the most savage eras of politics that I can remember. The kind of battle for attention and the battle of different parties out there, so many voices, 5 parties vying for contention and people's attention more broadly. And that creates inevitable clashes and discord. People are looking for fights out there. So he may want a more consensual politics where there's cross-party working, but he's not going to get it.
You make a very good point, Stephen. If Margaret Thatcher had had a proper debate about the poll tax, she might not have been given the vote in 1990. Stephen, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. I know this is a busy day for you. The political editor of The Times, Stephen Swinford. Now we're sticking for the rest of this half hour with the Andy Burnham plan. We're going to assess Andy Burnham's plans for devolution with the Mayor of South Yorkshire. That's after the break. This is The Times at 1 with Andrew Neil.